Hi, this is Tim Plunkett, and this is my submission for ModuleOff. I've just installed Drupal, and the only changes I made were changing the time format to 12-hour AM PM and to change the time zone to my local East Coast. First, I'm going to go install the module. ModuleOff depends on date and therefore date API. So once we enable that, I can go to the article content type and add a date field. I'll use the select list. We use the default settings for the field, and for this instance, each instance we can say this one is to provide a link to update this field to the current time. To make it easier, I'll set the default date to no default, and note that the time increments, we'll set that to 5 minutes for now. Once we do that, I can go add a new article node. And we'll leave date blank. Once we do that, we can set date to today's date. Now, as I mentioned before with the increment, you'll note that it is 10:23, and this is set to 10:20. So it rounded down. If we go back and change the increment, it'll allow us to do it more precisely. So this increment is a feature of date module, and therefore this button should respect it. Otherwise, it won't allow you to validate properly if you're expecting 5-minute increments. So if I update it now, it'll be to the minute. Now you'll note that here the link is showing up, but the date field is not, because it's the teaser. So we might not want to show that link if the date's not being shown. So under Manage Display, for teaser, we'll set this to hidden with date. And we'll put the link below the date field. That way now the link is gone on teaser and it's below it on this date. And of course this is all nice and Ajaxy. So that's pretty much all this. Oh, and then there's a requisite help text. So let's look at some code. The info file just has the dependencies. Nothing special there. So in the module, I put the hooks in the order that they're kind of used in the flow of the module. I wouldn't necessarily order my module file like this. But the first thing is the hook date field instance settings from alter. That's how I got that actual checkbox to provide a link to show up. Now, obviously, right now, this is only the assignment where the challenge was to only do it for nodes, so I've left it for that. And I didn't hard code this module to only work on articles because it really wasn't necessary. We just only add the date field to an article, and it will only work that way. So this is just to build that checkbox. Now, in our hook node view, when viewing a node, first thing, we want to only add the link if they have the ability to edit the node. So if we don't have access, then return. For now, I'm going to keep track of whether or not any links were added. I'll explain why in a little bit. So no links have been added so far. We look through all of the instances for this. We look through each instance of this specific node type, which in this case would be article, and we look for fields, any field that has our setting turned on, the module off date, which is the one we set up here. So if that setting is true, then we'll say that we added at least one link. Link is added. So now we need to find out the language of the field. Now, hook node view is past the line code, but that's the node's language. Fields are individually translatable in Drupal 7. So we need to find out the actual language of this field. So we do that first. And then we're going to have a little if-else here based on whether or not it actually has any data. So when you first are creating a node and there is no date field, it'll say set to today's date. And then once you do have one, it'll say update to today's date with the label. Now we actually add the link. So we add it to node content prefixed by our module name and with the field name. We want to wrap it in a container. We want to give it some attributes. Use the Drupal HTML class to translate all the underscores to hyphens. We want to add a link. The title is our link title that we determined up here. Our href, we have a module-defined path that I'll show the hook menu for in a little bit. We need to distinguish which node it is, what view mode this is for, the language this is being done for, the node's language, and the field name, and then our little flag to say that we're updating. Some options, HTML, since this title is going to have some HTML because of our placeholder, we need HTML to be true. And the one-liner to make this all be Ajax link is just use Ajax. Down here, to make sure, because we want this use Ajax to actually do something, and this is why we had that check before. If one or more link was added, we're going to add the Drupal.ajax JavaScript library. We want to use attached so that when the node is rebuilt, that everything is cached alongside it. So this allows for render caching. So this builds the link. This is the hook I used to let you position where it goes. So if you add anything to node content, a custom field, you can use hook field extra fields to expose that to the field UI. So we're saying, okay, for all nodes, go through all node types, look for all fields that have our setting, and then add that field with a little description. And that's what builds this, let's see, structure. That's what adds this to this page, so that we can position it, and Drupal will use this to adjust the weight of our node, or sorry, this node content link. So that's what that hook's for. So this now this path, this module off node, view mode, line code, field name, update, is here in our hook menu. Hook menu, we have a title, a page callback, a function, which you'll see in a bit. Our arguments. We want to have the node. We want it to load the node object for us using the menu loader. And then we'll need the 3 other parameters and this update string. So we'll pass the first 4 as the page arguments and then true. And I'll explain what that's for in a bit. And then for access, to make sure this link actually is allowed, we'll pass the string update and the node to node access. And that will return true or false based on whether or not the user has access to update the node. So this 1, 2, 3, 4 true maps to our node, our view mode, our line code, our field name, and with this, whether or not this was called by Ajax. So if it was triggered by a module, or sorry, by a menu call, then it'll have done by Ajax. Otherwise, you can use this function by default and have it update the date and not have it do any of the Ajax returning. So first, we want to make sure that this field, so because anyone could just put whatever they want, this is over get. So they can put anything they want in this URL and try to hit your page. Similarly, this function can be called from a module. So we want to verify the data. So the first thing is that the node type and the field name are valid for this instance. And then we want to find all the field info. And this is the tricky part. There's no good date module API function for doing this. So we have to call the methods and the functions directly. So we need to find out what the time zone handling for our field was and get a current time. Then we have to find out how the data is stored. So the display time and the storage time zones can be different. So we want to make sure it's set to the right storage time zones, since we're going to be writing this data. Then we want to limit the granularity. When you configure a field, you can say only accept hours and minutes, not seconds and whatnot. So we want to make sure that our data is following the settings configured in the field info. Similarly with that rounding I mentioned earlier, where you should respect the field settings and round to whatever settings they have configured. This is where, if it's a valid granularity, we round to it. This is important because if I were to go change my user's time zone, I would want that data to show up in the right time zone. And if another user in another time zone were to click set it to now in their time, I would want it to still say now for me. You need to handle all the time zones. Once again, with the language, you need to specifically get the field's language, not just the node's language, and write out the data. So we have node, the field name, the line code. We want to overwrite the data, so we're going to have a double array here with the value. And we're going to format it, call the format method on the date object with the format expected by the field. So you have 3 date fields. You have a timestamp, the ISO format, and the regular one. And each of those are stored in a different string. then we just call node save. Now, if this was called as an API function, we'd be done. But since we're calling it from an Ajax callback, we need to do a little bit more. So we need to regenerate the node view. And this is why we need the view mode passed, because the view mode determines whether or not which fields were set up. So originally when I showed from the home page, the link was showing up and the date wasn't. If I click this link, it shouldn't all of a sudden make up the date if the date's never supposed to show. So we need the exact representation of that node with that view mode and build it. And then we can just do our replace. We know the node will have an ID with the node ID, and then we can render our build, and then print Ajax render, and then exit. This is the 777 Ajax API, which was adapted from CTools in 666, and that is how you replace, the entire node with its the new rendering of it. And this is just the hook help, which goes on and on because I don't have wrapping turned on. So that's all there is to the module. And if you have any questions about it, you can find me on IRC, Tim Plunkett. Thanks.